what's up everybody? So today I thought I'd show you something. I'm working on an input component that has a label and stuff. Here, actually, I just closed the docs, but I can show you the way that you use this thing. Let's see. So particularly I'm concerned about asynchronous validation. So I'm building this library. It's called PP React. It's for PayPal, for everybody to use. Like it implements PayPal's design system built on top of PayPal UI, whatever. So I'm building a labeled input, and we have this fancy design. But the way that it works is we have our input, and then you just provide your normal input props. But then there's also this label, because it'll also render a label, because the label is actually like part of the input with this design system. And then you have this get error message. It actually has a default. A couple, like last week or so, I showed how the browser has this capability with inputs to show or to like validate them based off of like, you know, whether it's required or if it matches a pattern or stuff. So it actually has localized messages that it'll show. So it defaults to that, which probably like 99% of the time PayPal apps will not use the default because maybe the browser's localized to one thing, but the user is localized to something else or whatever. Or maybe we don't like the message that the browser is going to show them. But in any case, to override that, you provide your own custom get error message, and that'll you get the input, and then you can do anything that you want to with that input, including return a promise. And so if you return a promise, then you can make some asynchronous request to go validate that the input is valid. Make sure that, like in a PayPal Me scenario where you're choosing your username for PayPal Me, then they type in the slug that they want, and we asynchronously go to check if that's available, and then we resolve if it is or if it's not. So, it just occurred to me that I probably am going to need to have some sort of logic to just dump the old promise. We can't cancel requests or anything, or cancel promises, but I got to figure out a mechanism to dump the old one if there's a new one as the user's typing there. Like it's loading, they type some more, and we got to fire a new one, so we got to dump the old one. Anyway, that's sort of irrelevant to what we're doing here. So after 2 seconds, we check whether the input value is uppercase, and if it's not, then we're going to return a string error, the string that should be displayed. So how does that work? Well, we've got our input, we've got our label. There's also this hint text thing, which is kind of cool. Then the actual input, this is an emotion component. And then we have this validation thing. So I used to have it all in here, but I figured it was a pretty good scenario for splitting it out. And also I'm kind of planning on when suspense is a real thing that I'll turn validation into a component that uses suspense, because I think that suspense could probably do a better job of what I'm trying to do here. But anyway, so here we have this update error message, and that's an async function. So that's called, we actually have it debounced. So after 300 milliseconds, if after the user stops typing for 300 milliseconds, then we'll go validate it. So we're not just validating it as like crazy. Yeah, so that happens in component data update. So if the input changed or the user is typing and then they blur the input, that's when we actually can show the error message. So we'll, if they just tab through and it's required or something, then we show an error message, hey, that's required. So yeah, if the input changed, then we're just going to update it debounced. So the user's typing, we want to wait for them to finish typing what they're typing. If it's because they tabbed out, so the can show error changed, like they typed and then they tabbed out, we can show it immediately because we know they're not going to type anything else. So that is an async function, and we get this promise from get error message. So actually I should probably make the defaults be a promise resolve. Not that it really matters all that much. If you await a non-promise, then it just basically does what I just did. But yeah, so then we say maybe show loading eventually. And that's what I wanted to show you today. That's the promise race thing. So this is an async function, but you'll notice that I don't actually care. I just throw away the promise. It doesn't matter to me. So this fire and forget kind of thing. But I'm using this wait. Wait is just this function that takes an amount of time, returns a promise that resolves after that amount of time. And so we're going to wait for 800 milliseconds. I'm not sure if that's how much I want to wait, because we're already waiting 300 milliseconds before we even validate, and then an additional 800 before we show the loading state. So I think I might draw back on that a little bit. I'm not sure. We'll see. But yeah, after a certain amount of time, then we resolve this to, actually I was debugging something, and I don't need this to be an object. This can just be the value itself. So after a certain amount of time, we resolve this promise to validation.showLoading. That is just a symbol. So yeah, it's kind of irrelevant what the actual value is. And then we get that getting error. So this is the getting error promise that we get when we say get error message. So we take both of those promises and we race them. And what that's going to do is it's going to say, whichever one of these resolves first, that is going to be the result. Okay, so it doesn't actually cancel the other promise or anything like that. It just says, take these two promises, whichever one of them resolves first, give me that result. Resolve the so Promise.race resolves a or returns a promise, and that promise resolves to the same thing that the first one of these resolves to. That's all that it really is doing. And so the result, if the result is validation show loading, then I know that the show loading resolved first. So getting error took longer than 800 milliseconds. So now I can show loading. And so I'll say set the status to loading. And I should actually probably do this and not this dot, or sorry, and this dot is mounted. Yeah, because we can't cancel promises. The way that you'd want to do this is you'd cancel all the promises in component will unmount, and then you don't need to worry about anything. This is why people who are like love Rx are like, yeah, you should be using Rx. Yeah. I'm just going to use native promises, and I'll just be sad that you can't cancel. But anyway, so because we can't cancel, we have to add a bunch of logic here to say, hey, if we've unmounted, then I don't want to call set state, because that is indicative of a memory leak, and it also, it doesn't do anything really. So it's kind of pointless, and I'll get warnings in the console, and I don't like those. So I got a couple of those around. But anyway, that's basically what's going on. So we say, okay, fire this promise that like goes to get the error, and then fire this promise that waits for a certain amount of time. And if this waiting one finishes first, then we know we can show the loading indicator. And the reason that we're doing this is because if we show the loading indicator immediately, and that validation is actually doesn't make a request or something, it just resolves in a couple milliseconds or whatever, then we flash a loading indicator, and that doesn't look very good. So we wait for a little bit to show the loading indicator, and if it's taken 800 milliseconds, it's probably like it could take a couple seconds, and we want to show a loading indicator. So anyway, that's what's going on there using Promise Race. I have implemented this before without Promise Race, and the code was a little bit more complicated. So I'm pretty happy about the solution that I thought up here. Okay, cool. I hope that's helpful, and I hope you have an awesome day, and I hope a lot of things. I hope this lion doesn't eat me. All right, I'm gonna go. See ya.